Have you ever heard of America's first serial killer? A name that sends chills down the spine of anyone familiar with his gruesome legacy, H. Holmes. Born as Herman Webster Mudgett in the small town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire, in 1861, Holmes was not your typical child. He was exceptionally bright, showing an early fascination with medicine. His intellect was not the only thing that set him apart. From his early years, he had a dark side that was troubling, to say the least. Holmes's charm was as impressive as his intellect. He had a way with people, particularly women, that made him irresistible. But beneath this charming facade lurked a dangerous, sinister intent. As a medical student, Holmes was known for his brilliance, but also for his fascination with death and the human body. His peers could not have known that this fascination would evolve into something far more sinister. After his studies, Holmes left his small-town life behind and migrated to the bustling city of Chicago in the 1880s. The city, in the throes of rapid expansion and modernity, was the perfect backdrop for Holmes to begin his dark journey. Little did the people of Chicago know, a monster was about to be unleashed upon them. Holmes did not waste time. He quickly began construction of a 3-story building that would later come to be known as the infamous Murder Castle. This was not your average building. It was a meticulously designed maze of death built for one purpose: to facilitate Holmes's macabre desires. Holmes's early life, his brilliance, charm, and dark fascinations were all precursors to the horror he would later inflict. The birth of this monster was not marked by any particular event, but rather a series of unassuming characteristics and circumstances that culminated into a horrifying reality. In the 1880s, a young Holmes moved to Chicago, where his reign of terror would soon begin. The city, brimming with life and promise, was about to become the playground of America's first serial killer. Imagine a structure designed purely for murder. This chilling thought is the reality of H. Holmes's infamous Murder Castle. A 3-story building in the heart of Chicago, completed in 1892, was a macabre masterpiece of Holmes' twisted imagination. The Murder Castle was no ordinary building. It was a labyrinthine structure, filled with secret passages, soundproof rooms, and torture chambers. Its walls held unspeakable horrors, designed with a singular, sinister purpose to facilitate Holmes's dark desires. The castle was a maze of death, with hallways that led to nowhere, doors that opened to brick walls, and staircases that descended into darkness. Each room was a trap, a place of terror where Holmes could carry out his horrific deeds undisturbed and unnoticed. Among the many terrors within the Murder Castle were gas chambers where victims would be asphyxiated, trapdoors for swift and sudden abduction, and a dissection table where Holmes, the medical student turned murderer, would conduct gruesome experiments on his victims. Holmes' victims were often women he had seduced with his charm, or employees who had unwittingly fallen under his sway. With a penchant for life insurance fraud, Holmes would take out policies on these unsuspecting individuals, luring them into his lair, only to meet their untimely and horrific end. Holmes was a master manipulator, his handsome face and silver tongue gaining him trust and admiration from those around him. This guise of respectability allowed him to continue his killing spree unchecked, his victims none the wiser until it was too late. The true extent of Holmes's crimes may never be fully known. The Murder Castle was a testament to his cunning and cruelty, a monument to the darkest corners of the human psyche. It is believed that he may have killed as many as 200 people within its walls, their cries for help forever silenced by the soundproof rooms and the relentless gas chambers. Inside these walls, Holmes would carry out his dark desires, luring unsuspecting victims into his macabre lair. The Murder Castle stands as a chilling reminder of America's first serial killer and the unimaginable horrors he inflicted upon his victims. Holmes's charm was his greatest weapon. It was what allowed him to infiltrate society, to blend seamlessly into the bustling streets of Chicago, and to lure his victims into a false sense of security. Holmes was a master manipulator, a man who knew how to exploit the trust of others for his sinister purposes. His charisma was as deadly as the gas chambers hidden within the walls of the Murder Castle. Holmes had an uncanny ability to detect vulnerability in his victims. He would prey on young, single women, often offering them employment or a place to stay. He was a gentleman in the eyes of the public, a man of medicine, of intellect. This facade was his shield, enabling him to carry out his gruesome acts undetected. But the charm was not just a tool for seduction. Holmes had a penchant for life insurance fraud, a devious scheme that added a cold, calculating layer to his crimes. He would take out policies on his victims, ensuring a financial gain from their untimely deaths. This was not a man who killed for pleasure alone. He killed for profit too. Holmes' reign of terror was as calculated as it was cruel. Each murder was a carefully orchestrated event, from the initial seduction to the final, fatal act, and once his victims were dead, they were disposed of with clinical precision. Some were buried within the walls of the murder castle, while others were sold as medical specimens. Holmes turned his victims into commodities, a chilling testament to his utter disregard for human life. The breadth of Holmes's crimes remains a mystery, but estimates suggest a death toll as high as 200. 200 lives snuffed out in the prime of their existence. 200 families left to mourn the loss of their loved ones. Holmes's reign of terror may have ended with his arrest, but the scars he left behind will forever mar the pages of American history. In 1894, the law finally caught up with H. Holmes. The notorious American serial killer was initially apprehended for insurance fraud. However, as the authorities dug deeper, they uncovered the gruesome truth about the labyrinthine murder castle and its creator's terrifying deeds. The trial that followed was nothing short of a media circus. It was dubbed the trial of the century, with newspapers across the country feverishly reporting every chilling detail. Holmes was charged with multiple counts of murder, and the evidence presented was as horrifying as it was compelling. It was during this trial that the world got its first real glimpse into the mind of a monster. Testimonies from surviving victims, combined with the physical evidence found within the murder castle, painted a picture of unimaginable horror. The court heard of soundproof rooms, gas chambers, and a dissection table where Holmes would perform his ghastly experiments on his victims. One of the most shocking revelations came from Holmes himself. He admitted to taking out insurance policies on his victims before their demise, a chilling demonstration of his calculated and cold-blooded approach to murder. His crimes were not merely acts of violence. They were methodically planned and executed with surgical precision. Yet even in the face of such damning evidence, Holmes remained a figure of enigma. His calm demeanour and articulate responses during the trial were a stark contrast to the monstrous acts he had committed. It was as if the charming facade that had served him so well in luring his victims had not entirely faded away. After a sensational trial that gripped the nation, the jury delivered its verdict. Holmes was found guilty of multiple counts of murder. He was sentenced to death, a fate that many believed was a small measure of justice for the countless lives he had ruthlessly snuffed out. But as the gavel fell and the sentence was handed down, one thing was clear. Holmes was found guilty and sentenced to death, but the nightmare was far from over. Even in death, Holmes sought to torment the public. Awaiting execution on death row, Holmes began to pen a series of confessions. These chilling documents provided a glimpse into his twisted psyche, yet they were filled with contradictions and exaggerations, leaving many to question their validity. Holmes seemed to relish in the confusion and fear his confessions stirred, his narcissism apparent even as his life hung in the balance. He confessed to the murder of 27 people, though some estimates suggest the number could be upwards of 200. But in a chilling game of cat and mouse, Holmes claimed he had hidden the bodies so well that they would never be found. Some were skeptical, believing this was just another manipulative tactic to prolong his notoriety and torment the public from beyond the grave. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes met his end. He was hanged at the Philadelphia County Prison, his final words a denial of his confessed murders. His body was buried in a cement-encased grave, an unusual measure intended to deter grave robbers from disturbing his final resting place. The murder castle, the tangible symbol of Holmes's reign of terror, was eventually torn down. Yet its dark legacy persisted, casting a long shadow over the annals of American crime history. The building may have been demolished, but the horrors it housed continue to captivate and terrify to this day. In the end, the true extent of Holmes' crimes remains shrouded in mystery. The confessions, the body count, the hidden graves, Much of it remains speculation, adding to the chilling lore of America's first serial killer. The legacy of H. Holmes serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity and the evil that can lurk behind a charismatic facade. His story is a stark testament to the darkness that can reside within the human heart, hidden beneath a veneer of charm and respectability. It serves as a sobering reminder that monsters do exist, often where we least expect them.